JavaScript is one of the fundamental elements that make up a website. JavaScript is a scripting text-based programming language that is used to make web pages interactive. It gives web pages interactive elements that engage a user. Hello everybody, welcome to Coding 101. My name is Skutla. In today's video, I'm going to be giving you a crash course into JavaScript. I'm going to be telling you about JavaScript, and we're also going to be doing some examples so that you can see JavaScript in action. So JavaScript is responsible for making your website come to life. So for example, say you have a button inside of your website. In order to make that website to come alive, JavaScript would have to be implemented, or JavaScript would need to be used. Otherwise, if you were to click that button, then nothing would happen. So essentially, JavaScript is responsible for making that certain button come to life, so that when you click that button, some activity happens or some action takes place. JavaScript is essential for bringing that page to life and making your code, your general code, come to life. So before we get into our JavaScript course, we're going to need a couple of things. Actually, we're going to need one thing, which is a text-based editor or an IDE. There are many IDEs out there, but I highly recommend VS Code. So I highly recommend that you go to this website that I'm going to just show you. So just simply go to code.visualstudio.com/downloads, and you can find many different versions for your particular operating system. You can download whatever is convenient for you. There are many types over there that you can look forward to, but I highly recommend downloading Visual Studio Code in order to use some of the things we're going to be using in today's video. So go ahead and go to code.visualstudio.com/download and download Visual Studio Code, and let's get into implementing. To open a file using Visual Studio Code, simply go to your folder, as I've done over here, and then right-click. And then after you've right-clicked, let me just make sure that I'm right-clicking. Just open over here, just click Open with Visual Studio Code, or Open with Code, as you can see in this example. And once you do that, your Visual Studio Code is going to be open, and it's going to open at exactly that folder that you see over there. And then once you're done opening up that folder, inside of that folder, you're going to create a file called index.html. And you're going to create another file called app.js. So this is our HTML file. If you're not familiar with HTML, do check out my crash course on HTML video. I think it will really help you grasp the basics of HTML. It's very important that you do so. Make sure you don't proceed with this video until you've watched that video on HTML. That's very important to do. So here we're just going to put up a basic HTML structure, as you've probably have already seen in our HTML crash course. And again, if you have not done that, please make sure you watch that video. And I forgot to tell you to subscribe to this channel. Please make sure that you subscribe. And if you like this video, definitely like the video, and leave a comment in the comment section if there's something that you need for me to explain. So over here, we've created two files. We've created the index.html file, which is going to be our main file, which we're going to use our JavaScript in. And then over here, we've created our app.js file, which is our JavaScript file. So now we need to find a way to attach our JavaScript file to our index.html file. In order to do that, we're going to use a script tag. And inside of the script tag, what we're going to do is we're going to say src, and then we're going to reference that app.js file. And just like that, we've referenced our app.js file. And then inside of here, I'm just simply going to make an h1 tag, and I'm going to just say learning JavaScript. And then I'm going to use live server in order to deploy the code that we have over here. If you're not familiar with the live server extension, do check out my video on the top 10 Visual Studio extension that as a developer you must be familiar with. Even if you're a beginner, just make sure you check out that video, because some of the extensions that I elaborate on this video are some that will definitely help your development journey and just making you becoming a better programmer. So we're going to use live server. We're going to go live with live server, and it's going to deploy this application. And if we make changes, then these changes are going to be made on real time. So you can see there is our web page. There is our web page. I'm going to put it on a different web page because I want to have Visual Studio and the browser side to side like this. So this is good. And I also want to have the console. So the console is actually a platform that allows you to sort of like print out your JavaScript. So if you come over here and you just say console.log, whatever you put inside of here. So this is practically your first JavaScript project. If you say hello world, then that is going to be printed over there. So I don't know why it's not showing up. Let me just give me a minute. Actually, we just realized that I have to get rid of this console, because now we've integrated our JavaScript file, the file that we're going to be putting our JavaScript with this HTML. So in fact, this allows us to just go to our independent JavaScript file and then just type in JavaScript. So this is going to be your first JavaScript command that you did. So this just simply prints out whatever you put in as an argument. So this over here, this is an argument, and this is a method or a function. So this function is called console log. So it's just like printing out or displaying a particular data type or particular data. You can put whatever you want in this. So I put hello world here. You can say my name is Skritlo, and that will be printed out to the console. So this is our console. So when debugging in JavaScript, this is some of the things that you have here are some of the tools that you're going to be use to debug. So that is essentially it. This is our console, and this is our app.js file. We no longer have anything to do with this HTML file anymore. For the remainder of this project, most of what we're going to be doing is going to be in our app.js file. And what that simply does is that it captures our JavaScript and it compiles it and it integrates it with our HTML. And that is that. So JavaScript essentially cannot work independently, especially in our scenario. So we have to attach it to the HTML file so that we can see how it works with other elements of web development. And like I said, we've run our code with Live Server. And if you're not familiar with Live Server, once again, go check out my top 10 VS Code extensions video right on this channel in Coding 101. And please make sure that you've subscribed before you do so. So let's get into our tutorial for today. The first thing that we're going to learn about is variables. So before we get anywhere, actually, this is how you comment in JavaScript. So a comment is, let's say variables. Okay, so a comment is a piece of code that is ignored by the compiler. So if you put whatever I put in, if I put like something in here, this statement is going to be ignored by the compiler, so it's not going to be executed per se. So if I put anything over here, so this is how you essentially comment in JavaScript. So everything that you put in here, there's another way that you comment. You just do / and put 2 *, and you can see that there's an open * and there's an opening * tag, and there's a closing * tag. So whatever I put inside of here is not going to be executed. It's just a comment line. It allows you to maybe, for example, describe what you might be doing in a particular scenario in your code, so that you can be aware of the things that you're doing in your code. So this is how you make a comment in JavaScript. Very basic functionality. Apart from the console log, this is also an important fundamental step before we get into our JavaScript. So we're going to be learning about variables. So a variable essentially means anything that can vary. And in JavaScript, a variable is something that stores data. And that data can later be changed at a different stage in your coding. So what a variable simply does, it stores data. In order to declare a variable, what you simply do is you use a keyword called var. And this keyword just declares that something is a variable. And then you have to give that variable a name. So that name is simply an identifier. So we're going to store something inside of a variable, and we're going to store the name of this channel, which is Coding 101. So what we've essentially done is that we are declaring a variable using this keyword over here called var. We're declaring a variable, and that variable is named name. Or let me just say channel name. Channel name. So that is the name of this variable. So channel name is essentially an identifier for this variable, because like there's gonna come a point in your programming, in your JavaScript programming, where you're gonna have plenty of variables. So you need to have a unique way of defining your variables such that you can be able to tell what a particular variable is what stores, or what a particular variable, what you need to store, or you need to name your variables in such a way that you can know the type of data that is stored in that particular variable. So this is a simple way to just declare a variable. Let's declare other variables. We can declare maybe we can say age, somebody's age. So a variable can not only store like some particular text, because over here we've stored a particular text. By the way, if you see a red underline like this, this essentially means is that there's an error. So this statement is not complete. So that's why it's giving us that a red underline. So you should probably know about that. So a variable can store all different types of data types. It can store data, it can store strings. Strings is the text that you see over here, the text that is in quotes. So whatever's in quotes, most of the time is a string. In fact, all the time, whatever is in quotes is a string. So you can not only store strings, but you can also store numbers. So over here, I'm going to just put number 23, and you can store something called an array. So an array is just a collection of different data types. So we can have like a number array over here. So like I said, it's just a collection, and in order to declare that collection, we would use these brackets over here, and inside we would put in our data. So I can put like different numbers over there. Maybe these are people's ages or something like that. So this is just a collection of different numbers or a collection of ages. So this is how you would simply declare different variables in JavaScript. It's as simple as that. Honestly, you would just need to use the var data type, and it's as easy as that. So this type of thing is actually called initialization. You are also initializing a variable. You can say initializing, you can say declaring, and you can also say you're assigning. So in this particular case, in this statement that you've seen here, we're assigning the variable name channel to this data that we see over here. And in this situation, we are assigning the variable age to this data that you can see over here, which is the number 23. And in this instance, we're simply assigning the variable, a variable name called number array, to this data type or to this data that you see over here. So that is called assignment as well. So there are two more ways of declaring a variable in JavaScript besides using var. We've already know about var, but there are other two ways of declaring a variable in JavaScript, and those two ways are less than const. So the difference between all these variables is in the reassignment. So for example, in JavaScript allows you to change the data type that has been assigned to a particular variable. So for example, our age, we've said that the variable name age is assigned to the number 23. But if we feel that we need to change that age, we can reassign, or we can reinitialize that variable, and we can just simply say age is equals to maybe 37. So now age is no longer 23, but it's but 37. If we console log this, you can see that we have successfully reassigned age, and we're just going to say, you can see that our age is 37. As you can see on the console over here, we have successfully reassigned age from 23 to 37. So what let and const, how let and const differ is that let allows you to reassign something, and const does not allow you to reassign anything. So the variable that is declared with let can be reassigned, while in const, an identifier will not be reassigned. So let's say, for example, we declare a variable. We can call it, let's call it year. So we can just say year, and we can assign it 2022. All right. So we have a variable called year, and we've assigned it the number 2022. So let allows us to reassign that variable. Sorry. 2022, it allows us to reassign that variable, and maybe with something like 2023. So let allows us to do that. But const, on the other hand, if you declare a variable, let's say maybe month, and this time we're going to use a string, and we're going to say maybe December, and if we try to reassign that, we're going to get an error. Yes, January. You can see that there's an error that we're seeing over here. If you look to the console, an uncaught type error, assignment to a constant variable. So it's not allowed. When you've declared a variable with a const, which is now called a constant, so this variable is essentially called a constant, you are not allowed to reassign that variable once again. But if you were to declare this variable using let, you will notice that you are now allowed, there's no error on the console, which means that you are allowed to reassign the variable as much as you can. But if you were to define this with const, then you would get that assignment error that you see over here. So var works essentially in the same way as let. So these two, let and var, essentially works in the same way, but they differ in what we call scope in JavaScript. We're going to learn about scope a bit later on in our tutorial. But for now, let's just concentrate on these three ways of defining a variable. So we're moving on to data types. So in JavaScript, there are many different data types. There are many different data types. As we have already seen, what we've witnessed so far is that we have numbers. So we have numbers and we have string, which is just like basic text in code. So that is called a string. And we have arrays. We also have a data type called Boolean. And what Boolean is simply true or false. So Boolean exists only in two parts, which is true or false. So a statement can either be true or false. If I say today is sunny, that statement can either be true or false. So Boolean allows us to capture sort of like the validity of a statement using either true or false. And we also have a data type called an object, which simply we're going to learn about as we continue in this lesson. I don't want to complicate things for now. So these data types are divided into two classes, which is primitive data types and non-primitive data types. And what primitive data types are basic data types in which all other data types are constructed. So primitive data types in this situation, primitive data types include your numbers, strings, and Boolean. So these data types are called primitive because they are used to actually build other data types. So remember in this video, I had already mentioned that an array is just simply a collection of data. So the reason why essentially an array is a non-primitive data type is because a primitive data type is needed to build an array. So that is why it's called a non-primitive data type. It's not a basic data type in JavaScript. It's actually a data type that is built using other data types. So in this instance, if we were to declare an array, we would just simply say num. So let's just say let numbers is equals to 1, 2, 3, and we can also add in a string in there 4. So you can see that this is just a collection of different data types. So an array is a non-primitive data types, that is just simply stores other primitive data types. So that is why it's called a non-primitive data types. And we have another non-primitive data type called an object, and this is how you would essentially define an object. You would just say var, and you would say person is equals to. So it's just used to define an object. That's all you need to know from now. And this age and 23. So you could see that an object is actually built from primitive data types, which is the reason why it's called a non-primitive data types. But don't you worry, we are going to look at objects in this video later on. Now let's move on to JavaScript operators. So an operator in JavaScript is a special symbol that is, let me just write operators over here. So an operator is a special symbol that is used to perform operations or operations on operand. So an operator in JavaScript is a special symbol that is used to perform operations on operands. So operators can work on values or can work on variables. So for example, if we have something like 2 plus 3, then you could see that plus over there, that addition symbol is actually an operator. And what it does in that particular instant is just it adds 2 and 3, which ultimately the result is going to be 5. So this addition symbol is actually an arithmetic operator, and that's what we're going to start with. Operators are actually divided in different classes or different categories. And the first category that we're going to learn about is an arithmetic operator. And what an arithmetic operator essentially does is just it computes or evaluates arithmetic operations. So your usual arithmetic operators, you probably know them: your minus symbol, your addition symbol, like we've already learned, your multiplication symbol, your division symbol. So all these symbols that you see over here, all these operators are arithmetic operators, and they're very, very important when executing arithmetic operations. So the next operations that we're going to learn about is assignment operators. So assignment operators are simply used to assign values to variables, like we've already learned previously when we were assigning different variables. You see over here, we're assigning the word name to coding 101. So this equal that you see over here is actually an assignment operator. So there are many different assignment operators apart from this equal that you see over here. We have this assignment operator over here, which is just simply the same as, let's say for example, you declare a variable called count, and that variable is 1. And so you want to add 1 to this variable, so that this count is going to be count plus 1, so like something like this. So if we console log this count, you will notice that the count has changed now. it's going to be 1. So a shorter way to do this is to use this addition assignment operator that we have described, or we have commented out over here. And a simpler way to do this would just be doing something like plus equal 1. So as easy as that. And if we were to console log this, you will notice on our console that our count has changed from 0 to 1, and we've assigned it to a different value through that addition assignment. There's also a subtraction assignment. Let's say, for example, we have 10 over here. We can just simply put the minus symbol over there. So this is just the same as saying count is equals to count minus 1. So that's the same as doing that. So we've assigned it. So now it's no longer 10, it's 9. There are many different assignment operators. You can have the subtraction operator, the multiplication operator, and there's also a division operator. So we've already covered arithmetic operators. Now we're going to get into comparison operators. I'm just going to get rid of this now. Comparison operators, they simply do what they say they do. They just compare two things. So for example, let's say you have a variable, and I'm going to call it num1 is equals to 3, and a variable num2 is equals to 34. So what I want to do is that I want to compare these two values that you see over here. And the good thing about a comparison operator that I should probably mention is that they return a boolean. They return true or false. So I want to check if num1 is equals to num2. And in order to make that comparison, I would simply use this comparison operator over here. So I would just simply say num1 is equal num2. So that is called an equal to operator. So what it simply does, it compares these two variables, it checks whether or not they're equal, and it returns a boolean. And I'll show you that if you can console log this, it's going to give you false. As you can see on our console, it's going to give you false, simply telling you that the variables that you're comparing are not equal. And apart from that, you also have a not equal to comparison operator. So what it does, it checks if the two values or the two variables are not equal. If they are not equal, then true is returned. If they are equal, then false is returned, just to show you that the two variables that you're comparing are not equal. So what you would, that comparison operator just simply looks like this. You just put an exclamation mark and an equal sign, and there you have your not equal operator. And if you look at your console, you can see that true is returned, just to show you that the two values that you're comparing, the two variables that you're comparing, are not equal. We also have a greater than comparison operator. So it's as simple as doing that. You can see that num is greater than num2, so it's telling you that that is a false comparison. Num1 is not greater than num2. We also have greater or equal to, and its counterpart, which is probably less than or equal to. So you can see that is a comparison operator. There are many comparison operators out there. I will leave a link in the video so that I can show you many other different comparison operators that are needed in JavaScript. So we're going to move on to logical operators. So logical operators perform a logical operation and also return a boolean. So they create a logical operation. If you're not familiar with logical operators or familiar with logic in terms of computer science, then I would definitely recommend a short YouTube tutorial on that. It's something that's going to be short, so we're going to move on in this video, but I will see if I can do a video like that as well. So logical operators simply perform logical operations and return a boolean. So for example, if we have shouldn't have deleted those two variables that we have over there. So moving on to logical operators. So I'm going to just say, I'm going to create a boolean variable in here. So I'm going to say bool1 is going to be true, and then bool2. So these are boolean variables. Is going to be false. And so console log is going to be bool1 equal bool2. Sorry, actually that's a comparison operator we're talking about. logical operators. So the logical AND operator is created as such. So you would just say bool 1 and bool 2. So we know from logical operations that this statement is actually false, and we should get false if we refresh, and our console does so. So you can see that this Boolean operator over here is false. And if we create an OR, a logical OR, this is how you create a logical OR. It's just putting those two lines, and if we refresh, you can see that now this is going to be true. True or false equal to true. So that is okay. And then a logical NOT, which is just simply negates your logical operator or negates your Boolean value, is constructed using this exclamation mark. So you can see that our Boolean 2 is false, but if we put NOT over here, this Boolean 2 is going to change into true. So if we refresh, you can see that on our console, it has now become true. So that is essentially about it when it comes to operators. They're very, very simple to use, and if you might want to do a couple of examples regarding that so that you can better understand them. They're not at all difficult, and I am going to put in a link of some of the operators that you really must know as a developer. And I can assure you that as a developer, you're going to be using most of these operations or these operators throughout your development lifecycle. So I'm going to get rid of this. We're moving on to another topic in JavaScript called program flow. So one of the key features in most, if not all, programming languages is the ability to control the order at which actions are performed in your code. So for example, if you want to execute a particular line of code, but you want to skip a certain line of code, that is actually called program flow. And JavaScript allows you to do that, gives you the control to decide when to execute a particular line of code and when to deny a particular line of code execution. So for example, in real life, if somebody's at the door and if you know the person that's at the door, you're going to open the door. But if you don't know the person who's at the door, then you might not open the door. Or let's say you're not going to open the door. So in programming, it's the same. There are situations that are not favorable for particular lines of code. So you want to put that code on halt and actually execute the other piece of code. And there are also in JavaScript, there are some tasks that are repetitive. So you don't want to keep writing chunks of code to just make your code to become repetitive, because now your code is going to be redundant. JavaScript gives you the ability to execute particular lines of code repetitively as long as particular conditions are met in some of the implementation. So the first thing that we're going to start with when it comes to program flow is the if statement. So the if statement essentially allows you to run a particular piece of code depending on a condition. So the if statement, I'll just say if statement. So this is how you would execute the if statement over here. Just allow me. You would say if, then inside of these brackets, you would put your condition. And if that condition is satisfied, over here, you would execute your code. Or you would write down the code that needs to be executed. So if a particular condition is met, or if a particular condition evaluates to true, then execute this code that you see over here. So there's another feature of the if statement called else, which is used to run an alternative section of code if an alternative piece of code if the condition is not met. So let's say, for example, we come over here and this condition is not met. Else, if we write else over here, gives us an alternative code to execute. So over here we can say code 1, and over here if that condition is not met, then we would simply execute code 2. So this is a simple conditional statement, a simple if statement. If a condition is met, then execute that if statement. Else, if that condition is not met, then execute a particular line of code. It's as simple as that. So let's just see it in practice. I'm going to define a variable and I'm going to call it x. So num variable x is equals to 10. And I'm going to say if x is greater than 10, is greater than 15, sorry, then I want you to console log good. If x is else, which means that else which would definitely mean that that code was not satisfied, or that code did not evaluate to true, then console.log bad. So what we expect to happen is that when we get to this condition over here, this condition is going to evaluate to false. You know why it's evaluating to false? Wait, let's change that over here and put it in a string. You know why it evaluates to false? Because x is not greater than 15. X is actually less than 15. So that essentially means that this code that you see over here is going to be denied execution. And rather, this code over here is going to be executed because of that if statement. So x is not greater than 15. Hence, this line of execution is not going to be executed. And these curly brackets just encapsulate the code that we want to execute. So they're very important. It's very important that you put your curly brackets, or you put your code inside of that curly brackets to show your compiler the type of code that you want to be executed if that if statement condition is satisfied. So the if statement condition is not satisfied, so this line is not going to be executed, but instead this line is going to be executed. So now if we were to change our if statement, and instead of saying x is greater than 15, we would say if x is less than 20, then you would now see, wait, first let's try and see that previous example in action. Let's just save it, and you will notice, just like we said, x is not greater than 15, so this line of execution was denied, and instead this particular line of execution at line number 21 was executed. As you can see on our console, that bad was printed out just to show the particular line of code that was executed. So now if we were to reconstruct this and say x is less than 20, you will notice that now this condition will be met. This condition will evaluate to true because x is indeed less than 20. X is equals to 10, so x is less than 20. So what that means is that this line of code is going to be executed because of that conditional statement, that dependency statement. And unfortunately, this line is not going to be executed because this line was executed. So both lines in an if statement, these two alternatives or these two parallel lines cannot be executed at the same time. One of them has to be executed and one of them will not be executed, unfortunately. And if we were to save this and then we would look into our console, you can see that this line of code was successfully executed, and this one over here at line 21 was denied execution, all because x was less than 20 is a conditional statement that evaluated to true, and hence this line of execution was executed perfectly. Still under the topic of program flow, we're also going to learn about the switch statement. So the switch statement just works in the same way as the if statement. If you want to test different values, if they satisfy a particular condition in your switch statement, then you would implement the switch. So if you want to test different values, whether they satisfy a particular condition, and if they satisfy that particular condition, you would implement a particular line of code. Then you would essentially use the switch statement. So this is essentially how the switch statement is executed. Let me just find a way to put a template of how the switch statement is executed. You could see what we would simply do is we would just say switch, and inside of the brackets we would put the variable name that we want to test, and we would just come over here and we would say if this test that we see over here, if this value evaluates to value 1, then we would execute this action over here. And if that the variable name evaluates to value 2, then we would perform this action 2 that we see over here. Otherwise, if none of those cases are, or if none of those cases evaluates to true, then we would simply execute the default action. So now let's create a very let's create an example that you would like. So let's just get rid of this for now so that it's not cluttered all over the place. So I am going to still use my x is equals to 10, and I'm going to create a switch statement. I'm just going to simply say switch, and I'm going to put that x in there, and I'm going to say if the case is if case, and I'm going to say if our x is equals to 5, then I want you to say console.log. This is the code that I want you to execute. I'm going to say yay, it's 5. And I'm going to say if the case is that x is equals to 10, then this is what I want you to execute. Console.log. And we would say, hooray, we found 10. And if that line of code, once again, if we have a case where that x is equals to 15, then execute the following line of code. We would say, wow, it's 15. So, and then we need to have a default statement. What a default statement helps us with is that if we have neither of these cases, these three cases do not exist, then at least we have a fallback function or a fallback line of execution. We could just simply say console log, say so sad, because none of those cases exist. So what we're going to do is that we're not done over here. Just ignore the statement for a while. So we're going to put in a break statement over here. And I'm going to explain to you what a break statement essentially does. So what break essentially does is that it stops your line of execution. So for example, if I found that the first case is correct or the first case is true, then I want to execute this line of code. And then once I'm done, I don't want to continue checking all the other cases. I just want to stop there because that condition has been satisfied. And if it has been satisfied correctly, then I just want to stop right there. I don't want to do anything. So the break statement is essentially a stopping feature. It helps you just like halt the execution, especially in this switch statement. So it just helps you halt execution. It allows you to break out of the current switch and resume execution at the first statement after the block. So we can see over here that once we execute this line of code, then we will be able to escape the switch statement, and we're going to go to the next line of code. So if we were to console log this, you can see that because x is equals to 10, then this case over here is satisfied. But did you see previously when we didn't have the break statement that everything was being executed and it was not supposed to be executed, but if we put our break statement, only the line of code that satisfied the case is executed. So in this case, the case is 10, and so this line of code is executed appropriately. And if we were to put, let's say maybe 5 over here and then console log this, you can see that this line of code is executed. And if we were to put a different number, let's say 27, and we were to save that, you can see that the default statement is executed because that case where x is equals to 27 does not exist inside of our switch statement. All right, let's move on to another part, a section of program flow, which is essentially the while loop. So the while loop is one of the looping statements in JavaScript. So what looping essentially is a piece of code, is a function that allows you to iterate through an array or iterate through a collection. So let's say, for example, we have a collection of numbers. So we have num is equals to 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So we have a collection of 5 numbers inside of this array. A looping statement just allows us to go individually through each of these elements that are inside of the array. So a while loop gives us the ability to loop through a particular object, or just loop through as long as a particular condition stays still. So it's a different type of looping, because while other looping statements go through a collection, a while loop simply executes a particular line of code until a certain condition is not met. So we give it a condition. If that condition is not met, then the while loop would stop execution. So let me just give you sort of show you a template of how the while loop is executed. So it takes in a condition, and so we have like a condition over here. We would say while a particular condition stands still. So if this condition, as long as this condition evaluates to true, then this line of code is going to be executed. So as long as this condition is met, then this line of code will be executed. So a while loop is especially dangerous because like a code can keep running until eternity, because the condition will always remain satisfied. So for example, if we were to put true over here, we would have something called an infinite loop. And why? The reason why this is an infinite loop is that the condition always evaluates to true. Hence, the code is going to keep on being executed and executed over and over and over again, which is going to cause our code to crash. So the while loop simply states, as long as a condition remains true, the condition inside the loop will execute. And then after the code is executed, the condition is going to be tested all over and over and over again, as long as it is true. So I'm going to give you a simple example over here. We're going to do an example together. So what we're going to say is that while I'm going to give x the number 0. So I'm going to say while x is less than 5, then what I want you to do is that I want you to console log x is less than 5. So if we leave it like this, it's going to cause an infinite loop. Why? Because x is not changing here. As long as there is life in x's breath, x is always going to be less than 5. So we have to change that by incrementing our x. So what we can do is that we can use some of the comparison operators that I'm going to highlight in the article that I'm going to show you on the description box. We're just going to say x plus plus. So what this, sorry, x plus plus. So this is just the same as saying count x is equals to x plus 1. So we're essentially incrementing our x by 1 when we say x plus plus. So as long as x is less than 5, then I want you to execute the statement. And if we were to do this, we would see that our console log has executed the statement 5 times. Actually, you know what, so that it's a little bit different, let's just concatenate our string with a number. So we just, in order to concatenate a string with a number, all you need to do is just say plus, use the plus operator that you see over here, and you simply concatenate that string with a number. And you can see that our statement has been executed 5 times. So it's executed for as long as x is less than 5. So you can see that over here x is equals to 0, and then x is equals to 1, and then x is equals to 2, then x is equals to 3, and then x is equals to 4. And then the moment x is equals to 5, then that line of code is not executed because the condition is not met. Remember, the condition is that x needs to be less than 5. And if we come to a scenario whereby x is 5, so essentially we have 5 is less than 5, we could see that this comparison operator or this comparison operation will evaluate to false, because 5 is not less than 5, 5 is equal to 5. So that conditional statement is not executed, so the code inside of the while loop is not executed as well. So the while loop essentially stops in this situation. Apart from the while loop, we have a sort of a cousin of the while loop. So a cousin of the while loop is called the do while statement. So the do while statement, what it simply does, instead of executing the code before or after the condition, after checking whether the condition is met, the do while loop simply executes the code. So you would take this code over here and you would say do, and it executes the code, and then after executing the code, that is when it checks whether or not that condition stands. And if the condition stands, then it goes back and executes that code again. So let me just illustrate once again. This line of code is going to be executed first. Then after that line of code is executed, it checks if the condition still stands. If the condition still stands, then it goes back to the do statement and executes that code. Then after it executes that code, it checks the condition. So unlike the while loop that we did previously, the condition is checked after the code has been implemented. So that is the difference between the while loop and the do while loop. We're going to move on to another statement called the for statement. So this is usually called a for loop. So the for statement is essentially another form of looping in JavaScript. You can think of it as a more specialized shorthand version of the while loop. So the for loop allows you to specify the initial value of a looping variable. So let's say, for example, we have those numbers that we had previously, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5. So loop allows you to iterate through this collection, and it allows you to go through this collection based on a particular condition or test. And finally, a statement to update the loop variable all in one statement. So the for loop allows you to specify the initial value of a looping variable. So a looping variable is the variable that indicates where you want to start looping. Like maybe, for example, you want to start looping in this direction over here, starting from 2. Maybe you want to start iterating or start looping starting from 3, or maybe you want to start from 4. It depends on you. So in JavaScript, especially in a collection like this, there's something that you call indices. And indices are particularly different because they just show you where a particular element is located inside of a collection. This one that you see over here is located at index 0. So you can see that it's a little bit different in JavaScript. The one that you see over here is located at location 0, and this 2 that you see over here is located at index 1, and this 3 is located at index 2, and this 4 is located at index 3, and this 5 is located at index 5. So all indices in JavaScript start at 0. So they just simply show you where inside of your collection is a particular element found. So when we're talking about a looping variable and we're talking about where the looping variable is going to start, we're actually talking about the index of that array. Sorry, we're actually talking about the index of that array, or the index of a particular variable. So this means that you can write loops that involve a counter more easily and neatly than using the while loop. In fact, in the example of the while statement above, we could more succinctly write it as a for loop statement. So let's go back to our while loop that we did, and we're just going to simply convert that looping statement into a for loop. I'm just going to go back. Right, so our statement just simply states that as long as x is less than 5, then we need to execute this code that we have inside of here. So if we were to convert that statement into a for loop, we would just simply, the first thing that we need to do is to define our looping variable, and we're going to call it I. So we're going to just simply say start at index 0, or start at 0. So that's our looping identifier, and then we're going to create a looping condition, or a condition test, or a test that you want to be satisfied. And our condition test is that I needs to be, at all time, it needs to be less than 5. All right, so let's do that. And then we're going to increment that I so that we don't get an infinite loop. So actually, instead of I, we can just say x, because it's pretty much the same thing. And then that's all we got. I'm not going to say x, I'm going to say I, because it's different. It's a looping variable. So while I is less than 5, then I need you to console log I is less than 5. I is less than 5, and I'm going to concatenate that with our I. And just like that, we have done something similar to the while statement, right? So we're starting at 0, just like with our x, and then where our condition statement is over here, and then our addition statement is over here, so that we can prevent an infinite loop over here. So this is just similar to the while loop, but it is more succinct. So this conditional statement is going to be executed as long as this condition remains. So we can get rid of this while loop and just see that in place. Actually, we can keep it in place and see how they work the same with one another. So you can see that this essentially works the same way as the for loop. So in most cases, I do recommend using the for loop than using the while loop, only because the while loop has a tendency of doing of creating infinite loops, and we don't want that type of situation to occur in our example. So a for loop, just like the while loop, has a cousin of its own. So the for loop has the for in loop, which is a bit different from the other loops that we've seen so far, because it allows you to loop through the properties of a JavaScript object. And if you are unfamiliar with objects in JavaScript, think of them as black boxes that can have a number of properties associated with them. So for example, if you have a cat object, you might have a color property with a value of black and an ES property with a value of 2. So something similar to that. So also the for in statement allows us to loop through collections. So if, for example, our collection over here that we've written num, we can just simply say, let's just get rid of this. We can use everything that is inside of there. So what we're going to do is we're going to print everything that is inside there. We're going to iterate, but in order to do that, we would just iterate and we would just say for. So remember this is called a for in loop. So we would just give it a variable name, maybe call it item or element in num. And so this is how we would implement our for in loop. So element now represents each of these individual elements. So what we can do is we can just console log them individually. And we would just say ele. And just like that, our elements are going to be printed out. So you can see that the for in loop is a very, very essential statement that just allows us to iterate through a collection, or allows us to iterate or loop through properties of a JavaScript object. But we're not going to deal with objects today. We're going to deal with them later on so that you can have better understanding of how they work. So this for in loop has allowed us to iterate through this collection that we see over here called an array. Okay, so we're going to move on to a different concept of JavaScript called functions. I'm just going to come over here, just write functions. So a function is simply a chunk of code that you can use over and over again, other than having to write that function or that piece of code multiple times. So function simply enables programmers to break down or decompose a problem into smaller chunks that perform a particular chunk, or that perform a particular task, let me say. So functions are very important in JavaScript. They encapsulate the methodology of what you are trying to achieve. Instead of having to write multiple lines of code over and over again, you can just write a one-line statement that encapsulates what you are trying to achieve with that function. So in order to declare a function, you would have to use the function keyword. This is an inbuilt keyword in JavaScript. Then after that, you would have to put the name of the function. So we're going to create a function that just simply says hello. And then after that, we're going to have to put on some curly brackets. And then inside of those curly brackets, this is whereby we put the body of the function. And the body of our function is simple. It's just a simple console log statement. So we're just going to say console log, and we're going to say hello. So, and then after we've defined this function, we're going to have to call this function. And in order to call the function, we would just simply put the name of the function and put those brackets. And then after that, it's as simple as that. We've just called this function. And if we save this, you can notice that that hello has been printed on our console. So this function has just been called. If we were to just define this function and just leave it as such, let me just comment it out. You can see that nothing is going to happen. But if we call that function, you'll notice that whatever is inside of that function is going to be executed appropriately. So a function does take in parameters, and so what parameter is a value that is passed when declaring that function. So sometimes we may want a function to take a particular parameter. So let's say, for example, we want to be specific about who we want to greet. Maybe we want to greet a certain person. So we want to give it a name so that it greets a particular person. It doesn't just greet everybody, it says hello, somebody. So we're going to give it a parameter. This is whereby we put our arguments. We put our arguments and parameters practically the same thing. So we put our parameter over here in these brackets that you can see. You can put in multiple parameters if you want, but for this example, we're going to simply put only one parameter. And then we're going to come to the body of our function, and we're going to take in that parameter or that argument that we're going to pass, and we're going to mix this argument with the code that is inside. So we're just going to put name over here. So whatever is going to be passed here is going to be concatenated to the string that we have in the console log. So we're going to call that function again, but this time around, because this function takes in an argument, that means we're going to have to give it an argument. So let's give it a name. So I'm going to give it the name Kuklau, and if we save this, you'll notice that it's a little bit different from what we did at first, because we've passed in an argument and we've passed in a parameter, and it just takes that parameter and mixes it in with the code that we have inside of the body of that function. So it's as simple as that. Now let's do an example whereby we are illustrating how this function would work if it were multiple arguments. So we're going to create an addition function. So the purpose of this function would be to simply add two numbers. So in order to add two numbers, of course, we need two numbers, so we need to give it two numbers. So the first number is going to be A, we're going to represent it with A, and then the second number, we're going to represent it with B. Inside of our console log statement, we're going to say A plus B. So whatever A is and whatever B is, we're going to add those up and then console log them to our screen. So in order to call that again, we would just simply say add, and we would need to pass in 2 arguments or 2 parameters to our function. So we can pass 1 and 3, and we expect 4 to be printed to our console, and as it turns out, it's exactly what we get. So functions, in order to use functions, you would need something called a return statement, because see, in this example, we are using a console log, but in most cases, all you need to use a return statement. So the beauty of a return statement is that you're able to exchange the output of a function to other functions. So you're able to take whatever is being returned or whatever is being evaluated within that function and then pass it off to another function. So it's a way for functions and functions to communicate with one another. So just from executing this as it is, I'm not able to get the output. I mean, I'm able to see the output on the console, but if I wanted to get this output, let's say I want a variable. I'm going to create a variable called sum, and I want to be able to get the output from this function, which is probably going to be a number. I can't. My sum is going to be undefined because this function practically it's not returning anything. So that is why we have a keyword that is called return. The return statement can be used to return the value of a function call. The return statement denotes that the function has ended. Any code after the return statement is not executed. So if we were, for example, to put our return statement over here, you will notice that this code over here has been grayed out, and the reason why it's been grayed out is because this code is not going to be executed. So anything that appears after a return statement is not going to be executed. And if nothing is returned from a function, the function returns an undefined value. So for example, if we were to console log our sum over here, this variable that we have declared, you will notice that it's going to be return undefined, because that add function is not giving us the output, it's concealing the output, or it's concealing, well, at least in this case, because nothing is being returned. But if we were to remove this return statement, you will notice that it's console logging, but when it comes to the sum, as you can see over here, line 11, on line 11, the sum is undefined because this methodology or this add function over here is very selfish. It keeps the value to itself and doesn't want to share that value with other variables or other function. So in order to stop that from happening, or to make this function a bit more productive, we use the return keyword, and inside the return keyword we just simply say a plus b, and from that we're able to share the sum of a plus b with this variable. So whatever is going to be returned from this function is going to be assigned to this variable. And if we console log this, you'll notice that 4 has just been returned. In this case, we just console logged the sum variable. So whatever is being executed or evaluated and returned from this method is being assigned or declared, or assigned rather, to this variable that you see over there. And this is our proof that we have over here. So functions can actually be used as expression, can be defined actually as expressions. So they can be assigned to a variable essentially. So a function can be declared inside of a variable. So in order to do that, maybe let's say we want this function add. So we can just say var and we can say add. So I'm going to get rid of this now because we don't need it as much. So I'm going to comment it out actually. So I'm going to just say function, and it's going to take a and b as usual. And then our curly brackets so that we can put the body of that function in there. So we're just going to say return a plus b. And if you console log that, sorry, something must not have happened right way. Oh, okay. So we just take this variable and we put it over there. And if we press sum, and if we press save, you could see that now the variable has been printed to the console as expected. So you can declare a function as an expression and such. You can assign a variable to a function. You can assign a function to a variable essentially. So in the above, the variable add is used to store the function. Here the function is treated as an expression and the function is called using the variable name. The function above is actually called an anonymous function. All right, let's move on to the next concept in JavaScript that is known as scoping. So JavaScript variable scoping. So a scope essentially refers to the availability of variables and functions in certain parts of the code. So let's say, for example, right, we have this function that we have over here. I'm going to get rid of this one. So if we ever tried to access the variable that have been declared inside of the function, let's say, for example, a and b, and we try to console log that, we're going to get an error because like a and b is only accessible. Let's try and print b as well, see what that will do. We're going to get an error, and the reason why we're getting an error is because this a and b is within a functional scope. So it's available only within the function and it's not available anywhere else. it's only available within a function. But if we were to declare a variable over here, we would say let name equal to coding 101. This variable that we have over here is accessible everywhere. So if we were to console log this variable inside the function as such, and we were to save this, actually let's get rid of the console log over here so that we only deal with one console log. You could see that that name is just printed to the console because this variable is available globally. And if we take this same console, we take it out of the function, and we print that name and we console log at the end of the function, you'd see that it works pretty much the same way. And the reason why that is because the variable name is declared at the top of our program, and hence it is a global variable. It means that variable name can be used anywhere in the program. So the value of a global variable can be changed inside of a function if we want to. In the program that we have over here, what we're simply going to do is we're going to rename that variable. I'm going to just say name is equals to 101. And if we were to console log that, okay, so the reason why our function did not work the way that we wanted is because we did not call that. We called this function after we've made our console log statement. So if we call our function before we make our console log statement, you will notice that now the name variable has been changed. So we can essentially change our global variable inside of the function. So it is not always best practice to use global variables. And the reason why that is because the value of a global variable can be changed in different areas in the program, and it can introduce unknown results into the program. So you want to try and scope your project as much as possible. So in JavaScript, a variable can be used without declaring it. If a variable is used without declaring it, that variable automatically becomes a global variable. I'm going to give you an example over here, right? I'm going to give you an example. If we were to get rid of this over here, and we would just say name is equals to 101, and if we were to come over here and still console log the name, this name over here is now converted to a global variable. So if we were to save this, you'll notice that 101 is being printed, and yet we did not declare it at the top of the program. So that's the interesting thing about JavaScript. So a variable can also have a local scope, like we've already said. I give an example of some of the variables that we declared in the function, that they cannot be accessed outside of the function. So if we were to declare this variable inside of the function and we would try to access it out of the function, let's give this maybe a brand new name. So let's maybe call it x. And if we were to try to access that variable outside of the function, you will notice that we will get an undefined error. We would simply say actually an uncaught reference error, just to tell you that the variable that you're trying to reference is unreferenceable. We don't know where it's found because it is inside of a local scope. So that is how a local scope variable is handled. So these are the major or different types of hosting. Scoping when it comes to JavaScript. Let's move on to the next concept in JavaScript, which is called hoisting. So hoisting is in JavaScript is a behavior in which a function or a variable can be used before declaration. So before declaring a variable, you can actually use it. So for example, if we were to, let's get rid of all of this, if we were to say console.log x, and we were to say v x, you can see that in our example, we've used the variable without first declaring it. So in this case, because the variable has not been fully declared, we're going to get undefined. But if we were to come over here and we were to declare it, assign it a value, you would notice that still that we get undefined. So this is what hoisting is all about. We've declared a variable, we've used the variable before using it. So it's going to give us undefined. So if we come over here actually, and we, instead of using the variable, first we declare it at the very bottom, like that, without assigning it to a value, and we come over here and we say x is equals to 26. That's somebody's age, but not me. I'm a granddad. I'm not. So, and then we were to console log this. You can see that we're not getting any problems. So this is what hoisting essentially is. In terms of variables and constant, the keyword var is hoisted actually, and let and constant does not allow hoisting at all. We would get errors if we were to do this. So in this example, x is used before declaring it, and the program works and displays the output as 26. So this program behaves as though the variable was first declared. It behaves in such a manner, it behaves such the variable was first declared and then assigned and then after that used in the program. But it's this is what we call hoisting in JavaScript, the ability to use a variable without first declaring it. So in JavaScript, this is how essentially it would work. Okay, so now let's create a function and let's try to understand hoisting in the context of a function, because we now understand it in the context of a variable. So we're going to declare a variable, and I'm going to call it x, and it's going to represent maybe the number 6. We're going to just say function, say hello, and in this example we're just going to say b is equals to hello, and we're going to console log that b, and then after that you will notice that we have not yet declared b, and then we're just going to now declare b as an empty function. So now we're going to call this function and we're going to see what happens, and it works exactly as it worked before, so that's okay. But if let's see what happens if we were to console log b. You see that b is not defined in this case. So in this example, the variable b is hoisted to the top of the function, say hello, and becomes a local variable. Hence, b in this example is only accessible in the function, and b does not become a global variable. So just because you're defining something, you're hoisting something inside of a function, does not make it a global variable, as many would assume. So like we said, if a variable is used with the let keyword, that variable is not hoisted. We would get an error. We're not even going to get into that, but we're going to get into function hoisting specifically. So can we use a function before we declare it, right? So let's just make the body of this function a little bit much more simpler. So we're just going to say console, and then we're going to put in here hello world, and then we're going to try and call this function before the declaration function, and we're going to see what happens. And as you can see on the console, that function has been used appropriately. So this function has been called before its declaration, and the program shows the output. This is due to hoisting. When a function is used however, when a function is used as an expression, an error will occur because only declarations are hoisted. For example, if we were to say hello and then we would make this a variable, or an expression, sorry. We would just say function. So we've just used this function as an expression, and if we were to call that, you would notice that we would get an error. So this type of hoisting when it comes to function is only available for functions that are explicitly defined and not those that are used as expression. So that's essentially how hoisting works in JavaScript. We're going to move on to the next concept in JavaScript called JavaScript object. So many of you might be familiar with JSON or JSON objects and all that kind of stuff. You may be familiar with JSON files as well. So this is a very important data type in JavaScript. So this is where we're going to end our tutorial. This is going to be the last section of our JavaScript tutorial, just in case you're wondering. I hope you've subscribed. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to say JavaScript object. All right. So a JavaScript object is a non-primitive data type. It allows you to store multiple collections of data. So that's the reason why it's non-primitive. So let's create an example of an object. So this would represent an object. So let's say const person, and then we would put these curly brackets, and we would put like attributes or properties that are with regard to that person. Let's say maybe their name, or maybe their first name, and we would say coding. And then we could have like an age over here, and this would be something like 90. So we put in here properties that are associated with that person object. So this is essentially how an object is done. And I just want to show you the template as to how an object is actually declared. So over here we would like essentially, let me just put it in over here so that you can literally see how it's done. So we first start off with the object name, just like declaring objects. We first start off with the object name, and then after that we have each member of that object has a key value pair that is separated by commas and enclosed inside of those curly brackets. So as the same way with our examples, we made an object, we declared the identifier, we wrote the identifier for that object, and we've said that this is a person object, and inside of that object we would put curly brackets, and we would put like key value pairs that are separated by commas and enclosed inside of these curly brackets. And if we were to check the type of this object, and we would definitely get object. So you don't have to, this doesn't have to span multiple lines. You can always write this down in a single line. It's still fine, it's still okay. So what we have, these key value pairs that we have inside of the function, actually, like I said, represents the properties that are associated with that object. So if we were to make another object, like for an object for dog, we can store key or properties that are associated with a particular dog. Let's say maybe we want to know the dog's color. So we would put down here, and we'd say maybe it's black. And then we would write down its, what could we write down? The breed. So we would write down the breed, and then we would write Labrador. I hope that's the spelling of Labrador. And so you could see that these are properties that are associated with that dog. So in this case, like I said, this is a key value pair. So this is the key, this is the key, over here the color is the key, and this over here is the value that represents that key. So these are two properties. You can have as many properties as you want. Like I said, this is simply a collection of properties that are associated with a particular object. And you can actually access those properties and their values inside of dog. So if maybe we wanted to access this dog's color, we can just simply say dog.color. And if we were to console log that, you can see the value that is returned is the value of that key, which is black. And if we were to reference the breed of that dog, we would do the same thing. We would say dog.breed. And what is returned to us is the nature or the breed of that particular dog using, so essentially we're using over here dot notation in order to access the value of a property by using its key. The other way we can access this property is by using the brackets notation. So brackets notation is just putting down the object's name and then putting our brackets, and inside of that we would just write the key again. It would give us pretty much the same thing. But in this case we're putting down, we're using the brackets notation, and we're putting in here a string, the key in terms of a string. So that is how we can simply access different properties inside of our values. So JavaScript object can be nested object. So what that mean? What that means essentially is that we can have objects inside of objects. So let's say maybe we want to expand on the size of the dog. So size is quite an ambiguous value. Are we talking about the length of the dog? Are we talking about the height? I mean the width, how wide the dog is, or how tall the dog is, or how heavy the dog is. So there are pretty different ways that we can elaborate on size. So we can use nested objects. We can put an object inside of this object by just saying size, and we can put like those particular properties inside. Let's say maybe height. So we could just say 12 inches or something, 12 inches. And maybe the dog's width, we can also put that in there. We could also say maybe 50 inch. I have no idea what all these inches are. I mostly use centimeters, but I think most of you who watch this video will be familiar with inches. So if 12 inches is way too small, do not be surprised. So this is how we've just simply nested an object inside of an object. So it's possible to nest an object inside of an object. So let me say maybe we also want to capture this dog's hair information. So maybe we want to capture the color of the hair. We could say it's brown, and we also want to calculate the length of the dog's hair. I don't know if that's a possible thing to record. So maybe this is 100 inches. That's pretty weird that the length of the hair is much bigger than the dog. So this is a very weird dog. So this is how we can nest values inside of, we can nest objects inside of objects. All right. So, and we can also use, you can also use arrays to store multiple objects of probably the same thing or different things. Depends on what you want to do. So yeah, so I think that's pretty much about it from me today regarding JavaScript. Remember, if you want a tutorial, you want to be mentored on how to begin or or taught how to begin your coding journey, or you would want to start your coding journey and you just need somebody to guide you along that journey, please remember to contact me. I'm going to put my contact details on the screen, on the description box, so that you can contact me and we can help set that up. I could really help you become from a beginner to advanced in whatever time that you might be comfortable with. So if you're interested in some mentorship or some tutorials, I would be happy to do that. Make sure that you contact me and we'll get that started immediately. So thank you so much for watching today. Please make sure that you subscribe to this channel. I would very much appreciate if you could subscribe to this channel and make sure that you like this video. If you have any questions, any comments, you would like to ask me something, put your comments or your questions in the comment section and I would reply to them. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time on Coding 101.